Good morning. Good morning and welcome. I'll just wait one more minute for people to take their seats. Before I forget, if you could put your phones on silent, on vibrate, that would be wonderful. Okay, you can all hear me. I presume. My name is Justin Stairs. Good morning again. I'm a journalist. I've been based here in Brussels for 20 years. That's almost back to before the internet. And for the last 2 years, I've been head of news at Brussels Signal. Thank you for coming to our event. We are happy to have Tim Murtaugh here today. He's come over from the US just for us, and he's going to be talking about why Trump won, an insider's view. He worked on the campaign. I've seen the outline of his presentation. It looks great. There'll be lots of insider tips and a bit of criticism of the opposition, no doubt, as well. Then what's going to happen is we're going to have an interactive session. So please, while he's talking, think of a few questions. There'll be some microphones, and it'll be over to you. So I'll be the moderator of that part of the session. But before we begin, let me introduce Patrick Egan. Patrick is the publisher of Brussels Signal, is Remedia Europe, and Patrick is the chief executive of Remedia Europe. Over to you, Patrick.
Thanks, Justin. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, distinguished guests, members of the European Parliament, other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to see you all here this morning. We're delighted to have you here this morning. Welcome you to this Brussels Signal exclusive featuring Tim Murtaugh. Before I introduce Tim in a little bit more detail, I'd like to tell you, though, a little bit about Brussels Signal and what we do and why we're doing it. A few days ago in Munich, last Friday, as a matter of fact, at the security conference there, Vice President J.D. Vance gave a speech. I think some of you heard of it, maybe even listened to the speech. The speech ruffled a few feathers, I think it's fair to say. He opened that speech with the line, "What worries me most about Europe, the threat that I worry most about, is the threat from within. The retreat from Europe of some of its most fundamental values. You cannot win a democratic mandate," the vice president said, "by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win a democratic mandate by disregarding your basic voters, your electorate, on questions like who gets to be a part of our shared society." I suppose that more than a few of you gathered here, like me, thought of Brussels when you heard those lines, right? The cordon sanitaire, perhaps, in the European Parliament, which has shut out members of the third largest group of the Parliament, elected by the people of Europe, from leadership positions. We at Brussels Signal understand very well what the Vice President was talking about, right? We get it. At Brussels Signal, our mission is to challenge this status quo that prevails here in Brussels and in other capitals of Europe, to challenge the status quo, to create a forum for candid discourse, to raise questions others won't ask, and to counter the groupthink that so often shuts out the critical voices. We get it because we see it happening. As if to prove the Vice President's point, just this week, news emerged from Ireland, our friends over at Gript Media, which is a news outlet in Ireland. They are facing a court action to surrender complete access to their X account, Twitter account, otherwise formerly known as Twitter. To surrender the access to that account would include all the private messages, all the IP addresses through which they access that account, in short, completely sacrificing their journalistic integrity. They would be compelled to surrender that to national police as part of some kind of investigation. You can read that story on Brussels Signal. We have a story published this morning, written by our reporter, Carl de Koning. In France, the state regulator, Arcom, the regulator of visual media, may very well succeed in killing off channel C8, a TV channel that's been in operation for 20 years in France, because of programming that was supposedly too controversial. In the decision, that regulatory body cited, quote unquote, overriding imperative of pluralism, in a kind of Orwellian turn of the phrase. You can also read that story at Brussels Signal. Our reporter, Anne-Laure Dufayel, has been covering that since last summer. The vice president in his speech, as you heard, made some very pointed references to Romania. As you all know, the annulment of the presidential elections there this last year. The mainstream has been oddly silent on that quite incredible story. A member of the European Union, the official bodies have overturned the results of a presidential election. But we at Brussels Signal published what is, I think, the only detailed point-by-point account in English of the evidence, or frankly the lack thereof, that the Romanian authorities cited in the decision to overturn those elections. And you can read that also at Brussels Signal, or watch Justin's conversation with the author, Gabriel, our columnist, who wrote that detailed account. We get what the vice president was talking about because we also live it ourselves. Believe it or not, at Brussels Signals, we are denied recognition by the EU institutions as a news organization, despite the fact that we publish news and commentary, original content, every day. We have, because of what we are and what we do, that we dare to raise some critical voices and dare to challenge the status quo. We've been kicked out of office space in Brussels. We've been criticized for Justin interviewing some of the wrong politicians, democratically elected politicians. We also get the petty favorite around town of being supposedly a Russian troll because we have published articles that dare to question how effective the sanctions on Russia happen to be. Maybe we get this heat because unlike some of our competitors in town, you know who they are, unlike some of our competitors, we don't get millions of euros in subscriptions or subsidies from EU institutions, not a single centime, nor do we get any support from any of the political groups in Parliament. So we are so happy to have all of you here this morning because we believe strongly that alternative media is badly needed in these turbulent times, media that challenges the status quo. And if you think so too, we invite you to sign up for our newsletter, Brussels Calling, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and follow us on all your favorite social media. Join us with your support. And it's because we love to challenge the status quo and to ruffle a few feathers ourselves, we have invited our special guest today. Tim Murtaugh served as a senior advisor on President Donald Trump's successful campaign for President of the United States in 2024, a campaign that you all, along with myself, followed very closely. Tim had previously served President Trump in different capacities, one as Director of Communications on the 2020 campaign, and during the Trump administration as Director of Communications for Cabinet U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue. Tim has worked for more than 2 decades in state and national politics, including in senior roles at the Republican National Committee, Republican Governors Association, numerous political campaigns. He was also a fellow at the Heritage Foundation. He is author of the book entitled Swing Hard in Case You Hit It, which I recommend. I've started reading myself. It's a memoir about his escape from addiction and shot at redemption on the Trump campaign. And it is available where all fine books are sold. He's here with us this morning to provide an insider's account, as Justin said, an insider's account on Donald Trump's, how he won back the White House in 2024. One important note before I give him the floor. Tim has played a very pivotal role in Donald Trump's campaigns for president, and I think it's no exaggeration to say he's been in a position where he's gained a keen knowledge of how a Trump organization thinks and works, got a real insider's perspective. However, in his remarks today, I want to underline, he is not speaking in any official capacity for the administration. He's not here as a Trump administration official. He's talking about politics and campaigns, so please bear that in mind. And with that, I'm delighted to give you the floor, Tim. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. That was very nice. Far nicer than I deserve, so I appreciate it. They do sell fine books there, and also mine. Not one of the fine ones. So I appreciate that. This is my first time in Brussels, and I have found it really to be fantastic and interesting and fascinating, and I'm planning to spend an extra couple of days here, and even my wife is coming over in a couple of days to enjoy the sights, and really I appreciate the hospitality and the invitation, and thank you very much. And I am proud to say that I have been part of, I think, a senior part, a significant part, I'd like to say, of what I believe are the two most watched political campaigns in world history. And that's probably only because Donald Trump was involved. He has run for president 3 times, as you know. I was not involved in 2016, but I was the communications director in 2020, as Patrick said, and a senior advisor in 2024. And so I can, I think, trace pretty closely and pretty accurately, and I'm sure most of you have seen what happened between 2020 and the fact that he lost in 2020 and his eventual comeback in 2024. And I believe that everything that transpired between 2020 and 2024 all led up to his victory in this past November, and I think it has to be regarded as one of the greatest political comebacks in world history. Because if you remember, I'm not going to go through all of it, but if you remember, after the events of January 6, 2021, when there was a riot at the United States Capitol, that I think a lot of political pundits in the United States and elsewhere around the world would have probably declared Donald Trump's political career over at that point. And they would have said there's no chance that this guy can come back. There's no chance he could become the Republican nominee again. And there's certainly no chance he could ever win an election and get elected president of the United States a second time. Well, he proved them all wrong. And there's a variety of ways that he did that, a lot of things that went into it that resulted in his victory. And I'm going to go through what I think are some of the important points and some of the important causes, both on what we did as a campaign, what he did as a candidate, and also what the Democrats did, both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and I think there's going to be some talk about the news media thrown in here. One of the most significant events of the 2024 race was something that I think caught a lot of people around the world by surprise, but for people who followed the White House, the Joe Biden White House very closely, it was not that much of a surprise, and it was the debate that Biden had with Donald Trump on June 27th of 2024. To that point, the national news media and Joe Biden had sort of entered into an unspoken, maybe it was spoken, I don't know, but from what we could see outwardly, it was an unspoken arrangement that the news media would not cover, and in fact actively tried to hide Joe Biden's condition. And I think it's pretty obvious that Joe Biden had deteriorated. He did not have the mental acuity that he did when people had seen him when he was the vice president of the United States a few years earlier. And I think that they entered into a bargain with each other. Both the White House and also the Biden staff in the White House conspired to make things easier. We know now the great lengths that they were going through to try to conceal his condition by changing his schedule. He never had any meetings early in the morning because he wasn't very good in the morning. He didn't have anything on his schedule in the afternoon or the evening. He did all of his work basically between 10:30 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. And they conspired to do that. They never rolled him out in public at any of these other times of day where they knew that he was going to be liable to cause damage to himself politically. Every once in a while, though, it would sneak through and people would catch wind of it and sort of have an inkling. But the world saw it in that debate. And I think if you saw it, if you watched it live or if you saw any clips, you saw him mumbling. You saw him speaking very quietly, almost in a whisper, losing his train of thought, speaking nonsensically much of the time. And almost immediately, the national news media in America turned on Biden. And then you started seeing stories come out about the things that I just talked about, how they manipulated his schedule, how they would call and yell at United States senators from the Democratic Party who dared say things that even hinted at the fact that Joe Biden was no longer 45 years old. And we learned those things because I believe the media, they thought they had a deal struck with Joe Biden. The deal was they would cover for him as long as he didn't make them look bad. And when he went out there on that stage on June 27th and really demonstrated to the world that he was not up to the job of being president of the United States anymore, it made the media mad because it made them look bad. And they turned on him. And at that point, I knew I had not yet rejoined and moved down to West Palm Beach, Florida to do the campaign full time. But at that point, I was watching that from home, and I knew there's no way he was going to make it. That guy that was on stage that night was not going to make it to the finish line, and they were going to try to replace him, and I knew that was going to happen. Inside the campaign, they had always been ready for a potential change. They had a variety of Democrats that they thought were potential candidates to be plugged in. One of them, they tested all these, a variety of maybe a dozen candidates, a dozen names, did some polling on them, even did some mild background research on them. One of them was even Michelle Obama, that it was possible that she would be selected as the candidate. People think, the Democrats in the media like to say that the Trump campaign was caught flat-footed by Kamala Harris being rammed in at the last minute as the replacement. That is not true. She was at the very top of the list as the likely suspects to be put in when Joe Biden was replaced. And campaign manager Chris LaCivita and his co-leader of the campaign, Susie Wiles, they were ready for this eventuality, and they anticipated that it was likely that it would be Kamala Harris who would be placed in there. There was never, in my view, because of the ideology and because of the way that the Democrats in America have put themselves sort of into a political box, understanding that Kamala Harris was the incumbent vice president, I thought that there was no chance that they were going to have anybody else replace Joe Biden but her. You have to give credit to her team because they moved really quickly and they got her into place and they boxed everyone else out. But even before that happened, if you know the ideology of Democrats in America and how much they cling to the DEI philosophy, there's no chance, there's no way that anyone in the Democratic Party was going to be brave enough to speak up and say, I don't think she would be a very good candidate. There's no chance anyone would stick their necks out and say that about a woman who is, first of all, a woman and someone who is of Indian descent and African American descent. There was no chance. So she was going to be the candidate. After Joe Biden stepped aside, in my view, they were going to be stuck with her, and it turns out she was a terrible candidate. When that change happened, the reason why it was so easy for the campaign to I think, shift gears fairly seamlessly is because Biden and Harris, we were able to treat them as one and the same. She was, after all, his vice president, and so she inherited all of the problems of the Biden administration. There were some details around the edges, of course, and she had her own record because she's had her own political career as a United States senator and things that she did as vice president, but as a U.S. senator and also in her time in California. She was a district attorney, a prosecutor in California, and also the attorney general of the state. And the politics of California are extremely liberal and very left-wing, and that was always going to be a place where we could mine for some gold nuggets that we could use against her. And so campaign had been ready for that. And the media, the national news media, when she became the candidate, I've been around politics a lot for more than 2 decades. I have never seen the national news media gush and fall in love with a candidate the way this was even over the top. They loved Barack Obama. By God, they loved Barack Obama. But the way that they treated Kamala Harris, I believe they were overcompensating because they knew that once Americans saw her in action, that they would figure out that she was actually a really terrible candidate. And first it was termed, I don't even know if anybody in this room will even know what this means. I had to learn what it means. Brat Summer. When she became, does anybody know what that means? Brat Summer? No. You do?
I know, yeah.
Okay. What?
Based off an album by Charlie XCX that was all the rage with like 20-year-olds.
Yeah, so The way I understand it, Brat Summer, it's about being a young woman, carefree. You're going to kind of live your life the way you want to live your life. And yeah, you're going to make some mistakes, but you just brush those off and you just plow ahead. That's basically the attitude. And man, the media loved it. They declared it like the Today Show on NBC and all the national networks. It was Brat Summer. They used that phrase over and over again. It was like they were promoting a Taylor Swift concert tour or something. Seriously, the way that they treated the fledgling Harris campaign just as it was getting off the ground. And then they, instead of talking about policies and what she had either done as vice president or what she would do as president, they said what she was doing is she was selling joy. Seriously, this was the news media actually taking up the campaign, and the campaign's message is the Brat Summer and joy. And oh, by the way, on the other side, who do we have over there? It's Donald Trump, right? So you have joy on one side and Satan on the other. And this is the way the national news media framed the election. And of course, they went 40 days when she became the Democratic nominee. And then I'll get more into this, but she went 40 days from becoming there was a period of time in there where she was the presumed candidate. She had to actually go through the convention to become the formal candidate. 40 days before she sat down for an interview. That's unheard of in American politics, to dodge the media for that long. And I'll get more into that. And what they did during that period of time of hiding is they knew that over the course of her 2 decades in public office, she had staked out crazy leftist positions on a variety of different things that absolutely were not going to fly if she was carrying the banner as candidate for president. They had to go out and fix these things. And what they did was, one at a time, they had anonymous members of the campaign go to the Associated Press, or we have these online publications now. One's called Axios in Washington, D.C. And so an unnamed, on-background campaign source would say, on a variety of topics, she's changed her mind. The idea of an electric vehicle mandate, the fact that any new cars manufactured in the United States had to be electric, no more gas-powered vehicles in the United States at all in new vehicles. She was previously for the electric vehicle mandate. Her campaign on background anonymously said, she doesn't believe that anymore. And so over and over, the Green New Deal, which is, of course, an anti-energy, anti-fossil fuel package, which is all the rage in California when she was running for the Senate there. She actually was the co-sponsor, the original co-sponsor of the very first version of the Green New Deal ever introduced in the United States Senate. When she became a candidate for president, she doesn't agree with that anymore. And she never came out and said any of these things. Fracking, a lot of these things you see have to do with leftist green ideologies. Fracking is a method by which you pull natural gas and oil out of the ground by fracturing the rocks. I don't know exactly how it works, but fracturing the rocks underneath. She had very expressly said, when she ran for president the first time in 2020, actually 2019, said that she would absolutely ban fracking. When she ran for president the second time around, she's all for fracking, which is very important because if you understand the way the American election is, it's not one big election, it's a series of 50 state elections. And Pennsylvania, which is one of the battleground states, fracking is a huge industry and employs over 100,000 people in Pennsylvania. And so she couldn't be against fracking anymore. And so they had to send out some nameless person from the campaign to flip her on that position too. She wanted to outlaw private health insurance. That is, if you got your health care through your employer, no, that had to be outlawed, and it was only going to come from the government. When she ran for president, she didn't believe that anymore. She wanted to get rid of ICE, which is the law enforcement agency that polices our immigration laws. She wanted to actually eradicate ICE and eliminate it as an agency. Of course, when she ran in 2024, she couldn't have that position. That got changed. And she also had previously said that she wanted to defund the police and not actually pay for police departments in various places around the country. That, again, she had to change those positions. And so she did all those things anonymously. Not anonymously, but through unnamed background sources from her campaign, one at a time, saying these are the things that she has changed her mind on. When they finally rolled her out and she sat down for a CNN interview, there was such a laundry list of things that she had to answer for that it turned into a complete disaster. And this was, again, 40 days. She became the nominee or the presumed candidate on July 21st. She didn't sit down for an interview until August 29th. And they knew it was going to be, her camp knew it was going to be bad, because not only did they wait that long to send her out, but when they did, and she sat down with Dana Bash from CNN, they sent Tim Walz, her running mate, with her, which is an astounding visual. Her own campaign openly admitting that she wasn't up to handling an interview by herself because she needed her running mate to sit there next to her. And during the course of that, as she was repeatedly asked to answer for all these different things that she had flip-flopped on, she also needed to send a message to her left-wing base to say, hey, listen, I'm still one of you. And so 4 times, this was clearly rehearsed, and it's a phrase that she used on purpose because she said it 4 times. So she was practiced and coached on this. She said over and over and over again, my values haven't changed. Yeah, sure, I've changed my stance on all these things, but my values haven't changed, which was a wink to the left wing to say, I'm still one of you. And that's the position that she put herself in. And that phrase was just gold for us, because that was a gateway. My values haven't changed. It was a gateway to every crazy left-wing idea that she had ever had. We could say, no, she still believes these things. Listen to her. She just told you. And that was just a gift to the campaign. Additionally, she was never going to escape the Joe Biden record. The election was going to be about the economy and immigration. We knew that from the very beginning. It was going to be about inflation and jobs, and can people make their paychecks go far enough to be able to survive and support themselves and their families? And are we going to be a proper country with a proper border that actually enforces the laws that we have on the books? That is what the election was going to be about. The Biden record on those 2 things was terrible, and she was going to be saddled with it. There was no question in our minds. And in fact, she helped us by refusing to even try to escape from the Biden record. I think she was sort of handcuffed by the fact that she felt that she could not, for fear of dispiriting the Democrat base, she could not actively distance herself from Joe Biden. And so while we were hanging Joe Biden and his record around her neck, there was really nothing that she could do to escape it, which was great for us and very, very difficult for her, I'm sure. Every time she went out and did an interview, she gave us something. When we would hear, oh, she's going to sit down with 60 Minutes next week, we're like, yes, thank you, Jesus. We know she's going to say something ridiculous, and we'll probably put it in a TV ad by the time she's done. Her selection of Tim Walz as a running mate, they, for some reason, believed that he would bring a masculinity to the ticket. They did. And but they sent him out duck hunting one day, and I don't know if you saw any of the tape of that, and I'm not sure if you know about this classic American cartoon character called Elmer Fudd. Was one of Bugs Bunny's nemesis, and Bugs Bunny always got the best of Elmer Fudd. And the Ducks that day got the best of Tim Walz, I will tell you. He did not manage to bring home a duck, and actually didn't even, by the press accounts, did not even fire his weapon while he was out duck hunting. On the other hand, J.D. Vance was a masterstroke of a pick by Donald Trump. Some people on the right are like, I'm not too sure about J.D. Vance, but I think we've all seen him in action. The speech that Patrick was just referencing in Munich the other day was just wonderful, and it's exactly what Americans and Republicans in the campaign have come to expect from him. And speaking of Tim Walz again, another way that she was, many of these things, the structure of the Democratic Party in America today was really not friendly to her. Because probably a far better pick, and I think everyone would agree on this, that politically speaking, it would have been a much more sensible and more smart and strategic pick for her vice presidential running mate would have been the governor of Pennsylvania, a guy by the name of Josh Shapiro. He's an up-and-comer. He's got a bright future. Everyone believes that he'll run for president himself one day very soon, perhaps in the very next upcoming election in 2028. But there was no chance that she was ever going to pick him, even as important as Pennsylvania was, because it really boiled down to, and people believe that whoever won Pennsylvania was going to win the election. And here was the governor of Pennsylvania with an approval rating in Pennsylvania in the low 60s. So nearly 2/3 of the people of Pennsylvania love this guy. And she couldn't pick him because he's Jewish. And everyone knew it, because the left wing of the Democratic Party has an anti-Semitic streak running through it so wide that there would have been a mass freakout among the Democrats if she had selected a Jewish running mate. She could not do it. And so she picked Tim Walz instead, and it was a complete and total disaster for us. For her, I should say. Not for us. It was great for us. So that led up to a debate. She was formally installed as the candidate, approved at the DNC. She became the formal candidate. In Philadelphia, the first and only debate with Harris and Trump, and she did well. She normally is a chef of word salads of great repute, and she usually mangles sentences and has an amazing way of stringing dozens of words together without actually saying anything. But she put together, performance-wise, a pretty good performance in that debate for her. And the media loved her because they were predisposed to love her. And everyone reported that she had destroyed Donald Trump, that she had crushed him in this debate. And the media was just ecstatic. They were so happy about this. Except there were some warning signs in there that we kept on pointing to. To their credit, even though they didn't pay attention to their own reporting, but to their credit, both the New York Times and Reuters had convened focus groups to bring them in to watch the debate and get their reactions to it. And both of the focus groups said, the people participating said that they had heard that she's gone to great lengths to hide her positions on things, which is what we've been saying. So these voters say, hey, we hear that she dodges questions and she tries to conceal what she actually believes. So they tuned in and they wanted to watch to see if she actually did that or if she explained clearly what she stood for. And what they found was she did not clearly explain what she stood for. And in fact, it confirmed what they had heard, was that she tried to weasel out of positions and she tried to confuse people about what she really meant. And so, even though the media was saying, oh, she won, based on style, I guess, their own focus groups said, no, she didn't, because the undecided voters saw, what they say about her is right. And so we kept on pointing that out, and the media didn't want to hear it. And then there's another thing that flies in the face. It is a truism. 100% of the time, the candidate who wants more debates is the candidate who is losing. You do not want more debates if you don't need them, and the only reason you need them is because you're behind. As soon as that debate was over, it wasn't even 2 minutes, really, truly, 2 minutes after the debate was over, her campaign issued a demand or a challenge to have at least one more debate. And the media said, yes, it's because she cleaned his clock so bad she wants to do it again. We're like, no, guys, 100% of the time it's when you're losing that you want another debate. They thought, no, this time it's different. This time it's because she won. Like, no. And then they said, are you going to give her another debate? I'm like, no. Why would we do that? That would just be like throwing her a lifeline. And then the clear difference is, from that point and throughout the end, is that Donald Trump was very, very, very clear about why he was running for president again and what he would do if he won. There could have been no mistaking it. He was going to cut taxes for working people, and that means no tax on tips for people in the service industry, no taxes on Social Security benefits for retired people, tax cutting. He's going to cut taxes across the board, of course, but specifically cutting taxes on working people. He was going to spur domestic energy production, which would attack inflation. He was going to secure the border, which is what he did the first time he was president, and he was going to cut government waste. And you see what's happening in the media now in America. Everybody's going nuts because Elon Musk is running the Doge office there, and they're looking at government waste, and the media is freaking out. It was September 5th of 2024, exactly 2 months before Election Day of November 5th. 2 months before Election Day, in a pretty obscure place, the Economic Club of New York, Donald Trump stood up on stage. I'm kidding there. He stood up on stage in New York City at the Economic Club of New York, and he said, if I win, I'm going to appoint a government efficiency commission, and Elon Musk has agreed to run it. 2 months before Election Day. And then from that day forward, Elon Musk was a constant presence at Trump rallies. He campaigned with Donald Trump nearly every day. It became a central theme of the campaign. And now that he's won, and this is actually happening, the media and the Democrats acting like, what? Nobody voted for this. Like, well, in fact, yeah, they did. This is exactly what people voted for. So by the end, now I'm going to get into a couple things here some videos that I brought. By the end, we had it boiled down to two basic messages. And they both sort of went into the overarching theme we had to boil it down to a simple tagline, which is called the closing argument, was basically, Kamala Harris broke it and Donald Trump will fix it. That was really the closing message of the campaign. And I think in this first one, this is more of the economic message. These are two of our closing television ads. And the first one, these were both very effective. This is the first of the two-pronged closing argument, if you could play that.
A flood of illegals, skyrocketing prices, global chaos, and Kamala wouldn't change a thing.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
Nothing will change with Kamala. More weakness, more war, more welfare for illegals, and even more taxes. Only President Trump cut middle-class taxes, and only President Trump will do it again.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
So that's a very simple message. It's an economic message, it's a security message, it's an illegal immigration message. The record is bad. Kamala Harris broke it. Donald Trump would fix it. And given the chance to say that she would do something different from what Joe Biden, it's astounding to me that she would. That's a friendly TV show for her. It's called The View. It's on every day in America. That is the friendliest place that she could possibly go for an interview. That host was trying to help her by saying, what would you do differently from Joe Biden? Because everyone knew you got to separate yourself from Joe Biden. So it was a really soft pitch. Here you go. What would you do differently? And she said, nothing comes to mind. And we were watching it. It's on at like 11 o'clock in the morning every day. We were watching it. And when she said, nothing comes to mind, we were all sitting there going, I absolutely cannot believe she just said that. So that was the one prong. That is sort of the pocketbook and safety and security message. And then the second one was more of a cultural message. And these are the leftist ideas that she was unable to get away from because she was afraid of alienating the left-wing base. And if we could play that second one now.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
Hell no, I don't want my taxpayer dollars going to that.
Kamala supports transgender sex changes in jail with our money.
Kamala even supports letting biological men compete against our girls in their sports. Kamala is for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
That might be the greatest tagline of any television ad in American history. Kamala is for they, them. Donald Trump is for you. She never refuted that ad. That ad was destroyed. The black radio host that you saw there, that's a guy named Charlemagne the God, and he hosts a nationally syndicated radio show that is extremely popular and very influential and is very left-leaning. They love Democrats. They love Kamala Harris. And you saw their reaction to it. They're like, I can't believe this ad. And so they were begging her to say that it wasn't true. And she never did. And she couldn't because it was true. Those two ads together were devastating. And I remember Chris LaCivita, the campaign manager, he's the one who wrote that line. He was so proud of it. Kamala Harris is for they, them. Donald Trump is for you. That's great. So we were focused as a campaign, we were focused on two primary groups of people. Because, Republicans are going to get our Republicans, say 45%, and Democrats are going to get their 45% of their people. So it's the people in the middle. And we had them broken into two groups, low propensity voters, people who typically don't vote at all. We had to get them to come out, and then you had to get them to come out and vote for Trump. And also people who were probably going to vote but were still persuadable. And these were people who in 2020 had voted for a third-party candidate, somebody other than Trump or Biden, or there were people who didn't vote or they didn't vote at all in 2020, but were still persuadable. All of these people broke our way in 2024, and I think it was because of our, I think, very direct and very simple messaging and her with all the problems that she's had. Because in the end, her closing message, while ours was very simple, Harris broke it, Trump will fix it, or she's for they, them, Donald Trump is for you. Her message was, Donald Trump is a fascist. Don't forget January 6th. Oh, by the way, not only is Donald Trump bad, but everybody who supports Donald Trump is also bad, which is a curious way to run a political campaign by attacking tens of millions of people whose votes theoretically you might want to try to get. And so unwittingly, and I don't know why they keep falling into this, but one of the things that Trump loves to say at rallies is that, talking about the Democrats, he always says, they're really coming after you and I'm just in the way. And then the Democrats go out of their way to prove him right when they openly attack his supporters, and they call his supporters all these horrible names, and as they're lumping him in. And throughout all of this, Trump managed to build what I really think is an unprecedented coalition that carried him to victory. If you think about it, it really is remarkable. So he had the MAGA crowd, the Trump faithful, the people that love Donald Trump and believe in the America First principles. He had classic conservatives, and he had very much of the establishment Republican Party. He had labor, organized labor, not necessarily in name as in being endorsed by labor unions. There was a key moment in the campaign. The Teamsters Union is one of the biggest and most muscular labor unions in the United States, and they always endorse the Democrat for president, always. This time, one day, they came out and they announced that they were staying out of it. They were not endorsing anybody. And that would be a victory by itself, because that is an enormous statement. If the Teamsters are declining to endorse the Democrat candidate for president, there must really be a serious problem. But then they took it a step further. Not only did they issue a non-endorsement announcement, they proceeded to release the polling information from their membership state by state, and how they arrived at their decision not to endorse. So actually endorsing Donald Trump was a bridge too far for them, but they released the polling. And in states where union membership is very high and they're very involved and their vote really matters and it counts, states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, 3 really big battleground states, the polling in Pennsylvania was something like 65-35 of the membership of the Teamsters in favor of Trump. In Michigan, it was about the same. In Wisconsin, it was about the same. So somewhere between 60 and 65% of the Teamsters members in those states were pro-Trump. And the Teamsters released this information. So it was effectively an endorsement without calling it an endorsement. That was massive, and it undercut, not only did it boost Trump, it just cut her knees out from under it. Organized labor actively working to help the other side is something that you just hadn't seen in American politics in generations. So he had MAGAs, he had the conservatives, the Republicans, he had labor. He did better among black voters than any Republican has done in generations. He won the Latino vote, according to some exit polls, which is shocking. Democrats live in this fantasy land where they think they can say to Latino voters these 2 words. They think they can say Trump, immigration. And that's the end of the argument, and ta-da, we win the Latino. What they don't get is about 80% of Latino voters agree with Trump because they or their families or their ancestors came to this country legally, and you ask them, do you think that people should obey immigration laws like your family did? And they say, hell yeah, I had to obey the rules. Why shouldn't everybody have to obey the rules? Democrats never understand that. So he got the Latino vote. They thought that they were going to win the women vote by talking about abortion all day long, which I haven't mentioned yet, but they talk about abortion all day long. He won white women. Donald Trump won white women. And then he made tremendous inroads. If you saw what was happening in America in the summer of last year with all these riots on college campuses and protests about what was happening in Israel after the Gaza conflict and all of that, Jewish students on all these college campuses were fearing for their lives. They were afraid to go to class because of all the protests, the pro-Palestinian protests that were happening on campus. And Donald Trump is an unabashed, unapologetic supporter of Israel, and he was outspoken about what was happening on the college campuses. So he didn't win the Jewish vote, but he got a higher percentage of the Jewish vote than any Republican has gotten in a long time. And because what he told people was, listen, I just want the killing to end. Yeah, I support Israel, but I want the killing to stop, and if I'm president, I will end that war. I will help bring that war to an end. He also got the endorsement in Michigan of a bunch of Muslim imams who liked the idea of somebody coming in and actually speaking the truth. You know, they knew he supported Israel, but they also knew that he believed that he wanted to end the war. Kamala Harris was trying to tell everybody everything that everyone wanted to hear, and no one believed a word of it. So if you think about this, Donald Trump won the votes of people on both sides of the Gaza conflict. That's incredible. What other candidate for president or any office could possibly, now he didn't win a majority of either one of them, but he got more of them than any Republican had gotten in decades. Talking about getting at the low propensity voters, and I think what you guys are doing here with Brussels Signal is fantastic. The rise of new media is something that Trump really tapped into, and in particular, we focused on podcasts. And there's a couple of the really big ones. There's a comedian by the name of Theo Von who has a podcast that's he's kind of a quirky, strange guy, and he's really become pretty popular. But Trump went on there, and it's this long format, and he talked for 20 or 30 minutes or so. And he went on there, and Donald Trump talks about his brother. His brother died. He blames alcoholism for the death of his brother, Fred Trump. And Theo Von has had a problem with addiction. And Trump went on there and talked about his brother and how alcoholism had touched his family. And you can tell that it's authentic. He went on Joe Rogan. It was a 3-hour podcast. 3 hours he sits there and talks to Joe Rogan about whatever pops into their heads. And he pulls it off. And because people see it as authentic. The problem is Kamala Harris tried to replicate that and go on her own podcast on the left side of the aisle. But when that happens, she's revealed to be inauthentic. She couldn't go out and do the interviews because it really was more of a window in how phony she was, whereas he got the benefit of actually going out there and people can see the authenticity. The reason why we would focus so much time on those types of media, the rise of the alternative media like podcasts, is because I think we've learned from Trump, and J.D. Vance does it so well, is that we just blow right past the mainstream media, and I think the key is to tell them exactly where we think their place in the hierarchy is, to dispute the premise of their questions, to not play their game. And I think I'm going to show one clip of myself here. But this is on debate night before the one and only Harris-Trump debate. This was in Philadelphia. This is me sitting with CBS. And she is asking me a question about if Trump becomes president, everyone's afraid that he's going to use the Justice Department to go out and prosecute his political enemies. She asked me that question, so if you could play that one.
But talking about extending it to legal, other legal teams, to donors, it suggested the idea of prosecuting political opponents.
If you're going to ask a question about someone prosecuting political opponents and don't mention that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's Department of Justice are currently, at this moment, prosecuting Donald Trump, then it's not an honest and forthright conversation. They are currently, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Department of Justice are currently engaged in a prosecution that could end up with them trying to sentence Donald Trump to jail. The way you ask that question, it's though that's not even happening, but it is happening. And I think once you arrive at the conclusion that none of these charges
those are not directives of the Justice Department.
Who is in charge of the Justice Department? Is it an executive branch agency? Who leads the executive branch? Who appoints the Attorney General? The Attorney General is not part of the Constitution as some sort of independent officer. The Attorney General is a member of the executive branch over which Joe Biden and Kamala Harris preside. That's inescapable.
I do want to talk about the idea of the muted mics.
Okay, that's the end of that. Seriously, she changed the subject. I lost that one. So, what we learned when you're dealing with reporters is just reject the premise of the question. And instead, this is what I talk about to my clients, right? What I advise clients on communication and political strategy. And I'm happy to take and gather up some international clients also, by the way, since I'm in this room. Not a joke, not kidding about that. I always tell people, answer the question that you wish had been asked, not the question that was actually asked, right? And so in that case, she wants to say, well, they say Donald Trump is going to prosecute his political opponents. And I'm like, no. I want to talk about who's actually doing that right now. And I gave her the answer that she did not want. How I knew things were different this time, and I've had some conversations about this. I don't know if any of you saw, it was near the end of the campaign. It was October 20, what is it? My eyes are going back. October 20th. So about 2 weeks before Election Day, Donald Trump was in Pennsylvania and he went to McDonald's. Did you guys see that? And he worked the drive-through window, and it was a staged political event. And he made French fries and all that. And he also he went to a football game in Philadelphia that day, worked at McDonald's, and then he finished the day. He had a town hall also somewhere else in Pennsylvania, and then he ended the day in Pittsburgh at a different football game. So it was really the best retail politics day that I have ever seen in 25 years of doing politics. I mean, he, in a key state, Pennsylvania, he did both sides of the state. It was just masterful. And the McDonald's thing was great, and it made for great TV and great pictures and all that. And he was waving to people. You still see that picture on X now when he's waving from the drive. It's just fantastic. And I'm getting to a point here, but I just have never encountered it. This guy is a multi-billionaire real estate developer that somehow working class people identify with, and he identifies with them. It's one of his superpowers. It really is amazing. But to me, what was important that day was not the news value that we got out of the fact that he was at McDonald's, and nobody believes he was really working at McDonald's, right? It was clearly a campaign thing. And this is the last piece of video. This piece of video, this is what told me that things has changed. And when I saw this happen, I wasn't there that day, but when I saw this piece of video, I knew we were going to win. This is him approaching the McDonald's. So you get the point of this. We did not announce where he was going to be. We did not build this crowd. A local newspaper had reported a couple days earlier which McDonald's he was going to be at, and this crowd assembled itself. This was an organic crowd. 10,000 people lining the streets to come watch a guy arrive to make French fries. Now think about what this means and what Donald Trump had come through. All of the prosecutions. I haven't even mentioned the 2 assassination attempts. And the enduring image of him getting up with blood running down the side of his head, punching in the air. And his first reaction is to yell to the crowd, "Fight, fight, fight," after he came this close to being murdered. And he stands up and exhorts the crowd to fight, fight, fight. Throughout all of that, the 9 years since the day he came down the Golden Escalator in New York in 2015, all the way through it, all of the prosecutions, 4 different prosecutions, 2 state prosecutions, 2 federal prosecutions, a civil prosecution, a civil trial where the New York State changed the law specifically so that someone could bring civil charges against him about a crime that had never been reported in the first place 35 years earlier. All of these different things, what we called lawfare, going after Donald Trump. They woke up, Democrats woke up, and the media, every single day for 9 years and told everyone he's Hitler, he's a fascist, he's dangerous, he's awful, he will ruin everything, he's a threat to democracy. January 6th, everything. They tried to put him in jail. They tried to bankrupt him. And what happened? What was the end result of that? This. 10,000 people spontaneously lining the streets. Democrats tried every day to make it something that people should be ashamed of to support Donald Trump. They tried to drive Donald Trump supporters into the shadows, to never show their faces, and by God, don't you ever speak about it in public. Don't you say you're a Trump supporter. That's not allowed, not in polite society, no. This crowd, 10,000 people showing up to see the guy come make French fries, proved to me that 9-year strategy failed. It has to be regarded as the greatest messaging failure in the history of world politics. They tried to ruin the man, and they tried to ruin very many people who supported him. And what happened? The exact opposite. And so there, 2 weeks before the election, I knew that what was going to happen. And I'm going to wrap with a story from election night. In the first week of October 7th-ish or so, we released a polling memo. And what we had been seeing inside the campaign was there were 7 battleground states that everybody was focused on. It was no secret what the states were. Georgia, North Carolina, let's see if I can do them from memory still. Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. Those 7 states. Whoever won the best combination of those 7 states was going to be elected president. We started out towards the end of the summer and throughout September where Donald Trump was slightly behind in all 7 of those states. And then 1 week would come by and he would be even in some of them, about half. And then the next week, he'd be ahead in those states and even in the other ones. And then by the first week of October, he was slightly ahead in all 7. And he remained ahead in all 7 throughout the entire month of October and all the way up to Election Day. And we released this information to the media in the first week of October saying, hey guys, our numbers show that he's winning. And I don't know if they heard that or not because the media kept on. And then every week that would go by, we would say, yeah, he's still ahead in our internal numbers if anybody cares about that. We're winning. If anybody cares, we think we're winning. And we can see by their behavior that they think we're winning too. And then Iowa, this woman in Iowa, this pollster, Ann Selzer, came out with this Iowa poll. I think it was November 2nd, so it's like 3 days before the election. And Iowa is a state it should not be in play, right? It's a Republican state. Trump won it by 10 points twice. And she came out with a poll 3 days before the election that showed Kamala Harris with a lead in Iowa, 47-44. And it set everybody on fire. Oh my God, Iowa, he's losing Iowa. And the Democrats said in all the media sites on Sunday shows, it came out right in time for the Sunday shows, the last Sunday shows, which are big in America, the Sunday news shows. Right in time for the last one before Election Day. And it gave them all something to talk about. Gosh, if she's ahead in Iowa, then it's going to be a sweep. If she's winning that state, then she's going to win all these other states. Well, of course, it was never true. But we couldn't prove it wasn't true because we didn't have polling internally from Iowa because we don't poll Iowa because, of course, he's going to win Iowa. But that gave him something to cling to. And ultimately, of course, what happened was he won Iowa by 13 points. So that poll was off by only 16 points. And I believe, I don't have any evidence of this, but I believe what happened was that this is Ann Selzer. She'd been doing this poll for the Des Moines Register newspaper for 20 years, the gold standard. Everyone talks about the gold standard, Des Moines, Iowa, Des Moines Register poll. I think she knew she was at the end of her career, and she was perfectly willing to set fire to her reputation and her legacy. If for a Hail Mary last-ditch chance, let's see if we can give Kamala Harris something to cling to in the closing days, and maybe we can will a come-from-behind win out of her by introducing this bogus poll to the world. I believe that's what she did. It didn't work because I think this election had already been decided. Based on the crowd that I saw outside that McDonald's, I believe that the election was over several weeks before Election Day. And ultimately, that woman did retire, and she doesn't do polling anymore, at least for the Des Moines Register. But on election night, I was at the convention center in West Palm Beach, Florida, and a reporter from the Washington Post, and it was about 10:30 at night, and it wasn't over yet, but numbers were coming in all the battleground states, and Trump had a lead in all 7, and it was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so it was pretty clear that he was about to win, although it hadn't been declared yet. And she came up to me, and she said, tell me, did the campaign see this coming? Like assuming a pretty convincing victory. And I said, well, first week of October, we started telling you guys that we were winning all these states. And I don't know, I know you're used to campaigns blowing smoke and all that, and maybe they don't always tell you the truth, but we meant it. And our main pollster was a guy named Tony Fabrizio, and we knew that if Tony's numbers were right, that it might be an early night on election night, and it might be a pretty decisive and sizable victory if Tony was right. Well, Tony was right. So yeah, we saw it coming. And I think the moral of the story is that it's really great to have a strong candidate, a great candidate who is energetic and has a very clear idea of why he's running and what he wants to do if he wins, and that's what Donald Trump is and was. Very clear. There's no mystery involved with him. So it's great to have a decisive and focused candidate. And it's what I always say to people who ask about campaign work. I always say, and the other thing is, it's great to be blessed with terrible opponents. And we had, in 2024, we had both. We had a great one and they had a terrible one. So I appreciate everyone's time, and I thank Patrick for bringing me here today.
That was great. Thanks a lot, Tim. Wonderful, wonderful. Now, it's over to you now. Tim is here for a while. We've got a small time to ask a few questions. We also have Patricia Chagnon up on the stage here. Patricia is a former Euro MP with links to both France and the US. So I'll be taking questions. I'll ask you, Patricia, to react perhaps first to what you've just heard. But if I could just sneak one question in first. You mentioned both Ukraine and Gaza, and I'm wondering to what extent foreign affairs played a role, if any, in the presidential campaign.
It came up, of course, because those are things that are in the news. It was mostly journalists, I would say, that asked about them primarily. I think the Gaza conflict came up more often because it had, as I mentioned, it was very much a presence on college campuses, and there were Jewish students, I think, who felt threatened there. It was much more a part of the political landscape in certain states. I think it was definitely a part of the Michigan calculation because there's a significant Muslim presence, particularly around the Dearborn, Michigan area, where there are a lot of Muslim imams that have political influence there, and so it was very much a political issue there. The president wanted to be able to make inroads in both communities. He thought that he stood a really good chance of winning. I think he thought he could win the Jewish vote, and I think he thought he could get more Muslim voters than Republicans. And he was right. He got more of both than Republicans usually do. And so I think that was a lot more prominent. The way that he approached the question about Ukraine and the war there was, and I think it's pretty difficult to argue with, in that he always said, well, first of all, we want to stop the fighting. And then he would say this about Gaza too, just want to stop the killing. And with regard to Russia invading Ukraine, he would say, if I had been president, it wouldn't have happened. It never would have even started. And then he would point to it, and I think it's hard to argue with it. You can say whether he's right on the nuances or anything, and you can say, look, when Obama was president, they invaded and they took Crimea. Then I'm president, and nothing happens. And then Biden's president, and they invade Ukraine. I'm telling you, none of this would have happened if I had been president. And so now he has said, and I know the talks, and I'm not going to get into this because I don't want to get any text messages from my friends at the White House saying, what did you say? But I still believe that he has the position that he just wants the war to end, and they're working that out now, and I'm sure his approach will become clearer in the coming days. But those two things were campaign issues that came up. But from our perspective, it was primarily a campaign about the economy and national security on our border.
Okay, Patricia, please, the floor is yours. You can react or ask a question as you wish.
First of all, thank you for inviting me to, first of all, meet you, Tim, which I listened to you with very great interest. Thank you for inviting and for organizing these events, because they're so important with what's ahead of us here in Europe and in France. Yes, I know I don't speak with a French accent, but do remember I am French. I'm not speaking on behalf of my political party. This is on purpose because I want to have the freedom to say what I really feel about this, having my opinion as being not an American citizen, but having grown up and been in the United States since a very small child, and having been for the inauguration, of course, in Washington this year, as I was in 2016. Tim, it was amazing to be in Washington, where I, of course, followed the campaign. And there were two things that really came out of that campaign and what I felt being on the ground. I went there, I had my tickets for Arena 1, but I went there and stood out in the crowds for 4 hours. It was freezing cold, it was -14, but I like to go there and feel the vibe. What are people talking about? How do they relate to each other? What are the subjects? Are they singing? Are they using slogans? What are they doing? And what was so remarkable was the enthusiasm that the Trump campaign created among their electorate. I have never seen that. I have never seen people after an election, when you're in a campaign office and there is election results and you win, everybody goes, yeah. But this was like profound happiness, enthusiasm. I want to get up tomorrow morning because what am I going to do tomorrow together for America? That was brilliant. Secondly, what really showed the success of your campaign, and you focused on it, on the two elements that you pulled out, the two main propaganda campaign slogans. Every single person I met, I asked, why did you vote for Trump? And everybody had a very precise answer. And that is something I have not witnessed in France. When you go in France after election and you say, people, why did you vote? Very often you get, well, you know, he was the best candidate, really had a good speech. You had very precise reasons. It's good for my business. I want immigration to stop. Trump looks after the veterans. They were very, very sure in their minds why they voted. So I think that's a very good lesson to be learned for us in Europe, for us in France. You were able to create that enthusiasm through your campaign in a brilliant way. Of course, you had a fabulous candidate. And you were also able to get them related to the campaign by having a very clear identification of why they were going to vote for the Trump administration. Brilliant story of success, and wonderful to have your direct comments here.
Okay, now the floor is yours. Do I have any questions? They don't have to all be complimentary. You, sir. We have a microphone. Let me see. Do we have a microphone at the back? Yes, we do have somebody coming over. Thank you very much. Could you identify yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Seth De La Haye. I'm the founder and principal of Stoic Leadership. Tim, good having you here. So I got two questions. First of all, you didn't go very deep into the fact of Trump being hit. Can you give an example of how you used that in the campaign? And the second question, as you mentioned yourself, everything is a signal. So I was wondering, what message are you giving us with your red socks?
Oh, there's no message. I always try to match my socks to my tie. If I had been wearing a yellow tie, I'd have yellow socks on. Tomorrow, in fact, I'll probably have yellow socks because I only brought 2 ties with me, and tomorrow's tie is yellow. But you're right. I mean, I realized through a lot of what I prepared to talk about was just mostly in bullet point form, and so a lot of it was just I was talking off the top of my head, and I realized at a certain point that, my God, I haven't even mentioned the assassination attempt. 2 of them, really. One, which would have been successful if not for an insane stroke of luck of how he turned his head at the exact right moment and the bullet just whizzed past him. I wouldn't say that we used, to use that word, we didn't really employ the assassination attempt as part of the campaign. That picture, I think, and the bloody ear and the fact that he talked about it at the Republican National Convention when he came and gave his speech, his acceptance speech when he became the nominee again. He talked about it there, and it was pretty poignant. I think it was such, the image, the picture of him rising up and saying, fight, 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 all of that, it spoke for itself. And I kind of feel like if we had put it in an ad or done something a little bit more in your face about it, I think it probably would have lessened the actual impact that everyone saw anyway. You know, that's one of those things, that's something that happened in this campaign. People refer to a black swan event, which is, you know, something that happens that's extraordinarily rare. Everything about this campaign made it a black swan campaign. The fact that he survived an assassination attempt that grazed his ear, I mean, it's just astounding, the stroke of luck. And he believes, and I think he really firmly believes, and hearing him talk about it privately, he believes that it was the hand of God that turned his head, that caused him not to die on the stage that day. And also, you know, we didn't use it. Someone did die that day at the rally. And so it was not something that the campaign was going to try to exploit. I think it was enough of an enormous and emotional event on its own. And let me say something about, I mentioned Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. I want to say something about him. Pennsylvania is my home state. And I read a story about Corey Contempore, the gentleman who did die that day, and when he was being remembered by his family. And Josh Shapiro who is partisan. He's a partisan Democrat. He is a politician in America, and he's just as partisan as anybody else. But he was quoted at length in all of these stories as people were profiling the guy who died that day. And he said that Corey was, he was a husband, he was a father, he was a hard worker, he was a cherished member of his community, he was a Little League baseball coach, and all he wanted to do that day was get up and go to a rally to support the candidate for president that he loved and admired. And that's what he wanted to do that day, and instead he was killed by this crazed maniac. There is not a single Democrat anywhere else in America who has the ability to say anything that is remotely complimentary if it involves Donald Trump. But he was able to do that. And that, to me, shows that Josh Shapiro is an incredibly talented and gifted politician and is able to say the things that he's supposed to say, even if it might be excruciating for him to say it politically, to even brush up against something that's complimentary about Donald Trump is not something that any other Democrat, I don't think, anywhere in the country could manage to say. But anyway, I'm away from the point, but I think what happened that day in Bedford, Pennsylvania sort of stood on its own. It wouldn't have been right for us to push it anyway, I don't think.
Okay, let's have another question. You, sir. Could you identify yourself, please? Sir?
Hi, Evaldas Labanauskas, Lithuania Media. Thank you for a very nice presentation and very deep. I totally agree with you that Democrats made a lot of mistakes and the whole campaign was not very good. But from your point of view, does it mean that, is it possible that not Trump, but for example, another Republican candidate would win because of such bad Democratic campaign? And another question, do you think already about 2028 elections? You already mentioned Shapiro. What do you think about Republican Party in the sense? Thank you.
I think, to answer that last part first, I think J.D. Vance would be an excellent standard bearer for the Republicans. I think he would be, there's, the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again. He would be a natural heir to that movement because I don't think that it dies when Donald Trump leaves the stage. I like J.D. Vance a lot, and I know his whole team, and I think he would make a fine candidate. I'm not going to pick sides here just yet because I don't know who's going to come out, but whoever does come out and decide to run for president, because I'm sure there will be a decent-sized field, he has an enormous head start on everybody. As far as would it have been a different election, or could a Republican still have won in 2024 if it had been someone other than Donald Trump? I think there are a lot of Republicans who could have beaten either Joe Biden or Kamala Harris because I think that they had a terrible record, they had bad policies, they had bad results, and they really had nothing. What she was running on was that Donald Trump is bad. And if you've been vice president of the United States for 4 years, and that's the best thing that you can muster is that the other guy is bad, that's pretty bad. But I would say that Donald Trump was uniquely positioned to win because everyone who voted in this election, regardless of if it was their first time voting or not, they were still alive in America. Everyone who voted in this election lived through both the Trump administration and the Biden-Harris administration. It's a very unique circumstance in American politics. It's only ever happened once before where a president ran for re-election non-consecutively. Biden had been president, Harris had been vice president, and the other guy had already been president too. So people had experienced the results of both sets of policies. And Donald Trump is the one who set the table. Yeah, another Republican could possibly have stepped in and won the election, but it's because of the dynamics that he created with his first term and his first 2 runs for president. And I think the Biden presidency was basically a creation. I think Biden, had COVID not happened, had there been no COVID global pandemic, Donald Trump gets reelected the first time. And I believe that the media seized on COVID to blame Donald Trump for it, beat him over the head with it 24 hours a day, and the American people were a little bit freaked out about COVID, and they were looking for something different, and I think that's what happened. And without even getting into all the questions about what actually happened in the 2020 election, we'll just accept the results for what they appear to be. But that some other Republican, the bottom line is some other Republican, yes, could have won, but it was Donald Trump. Donald Trump was uniquely positioned to win, and he's the one who created the ability for any Republican to do it.
Madam, at the front here, please, Sophia, thank you.
Good morning, team. Your presentation was great. I've flown fresh in just to come and hear you speaking.
Who do you represent, please? Are you here?
Yes, my name is Sandra Pisella White, and I'm an independent consultant and political advisor. I'm based in London and work internationally. Actually, my question is regarding what you just said about the alternative media outlets, and I was in the problems that we are facing in Europe, going back to what your counterpart said. What do you think about positioning more like in Europe and America, globalism versus its counterpart? Because recently, Marine Le Pen, she highlighted that we are not anymore like voting right or left, we are voting globalism or non-globalism and common sense. So sometimes I think it would be very good to cooperate from this side and the American side, and including all alternative media outlets to reinforce our message. Because what you see during your election in America or our elections over here is that the predominant version is always the globalist, and is causing uncertainty among the people. So that's one side. Do you think it would be wise to cooperate? Because we have many grassroots movements, including Make Europe Great Again on this side, and you have MAGA in America. And, you know, you're not very well represented, the MAGA side in London, because the Republicans that are sitting there, they're not on your side, on the same page. So that would be my question. Do you think there is a potential there for cooperation?
Okay, so first Tim and then Patricia.
Yeah, I think there is, and I think we've already seen it, because I think the first Trump campaign in 2015 and 16, which is where MAGA came from, was very closely related to Brexit, I think. It was the same sentiments, the same sort of movement towards taking care of things at home. I saw somebody the other day, and a lot of the debate that's going on right now is over what Trump is attacking as far as government spending in America, or more accurately, government spending by American government outside of America with this USAID agency. And somebody likened it to watering your neighbor's lawn while your own house is on fire. And so I think that while it may not be the easiest thing in the world to make, and I wouldn't call it isolationism, I would say taking care of business at home first, which is, you know, the simplest way of putting it, America first, Europe first, England first, whatever. I think those are kind of parallel tracks, but if you are serious about that as your priority, then you are taking care of things in your own yard, and you may, you know, have like-minded. I'm not sure if I'm getting at the point of your question or not, but so if you really are Europe first or America first, then those things do have to come first, and cooperation internationally is naturally second, I think.
Okay, Patricia, would you like?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that question, because we've been discussing, of course, the American campaign, but there is an undercurrent going on worldwide. We have seen the elections in Hungary. We've seen what has happened in Holland with PVV becoming the biggest parties. We are keenly awaiting what will happen in Germany over the next couple of days. We can see it in Italy. We can see rising sovereignist movements everywhere. And I think that's the undercurrent. There is a opposition. The people have realized that globalism and mass migration is just not working in Western countries. So basically, I think what has happened with the victory of President Trump and with the new administration in place is that we've actually entered a new era. Before sovereign parties were winning or losing elections, climbing up in Europe, we've now got a major win on the other side of the Atlantic. It is the end of woke policies. It's the end of rising energy prices. It's the end of stupid green, policies that are hurting our industries and driving our families crazy with high prices and no mobility. It is the end of deindustrialization of the West. It is the end of mass immigration, and it is the return to sovereignty and I think to world peace, which is only going to be able to be obtained through sovereign countries, being sovereign countries and no longer imperialistic countries like the US has been very imperialistic under Democrat governments, mingling in other countries all the time. President Trump is very clear, America first, that's it. The EU is exactly the same. They're mingling everywhere in businesses that doesn't concern them. I was on missions to Mexico, I was on missions to Paraguay, and they're going to say that we're going to give you subsidies, but you have to put into your school books gender theories. Yes. What are you guys mingling with? What role is it? So the EU has had a very imperialistic attitude, which is crumbling today, and which we, of course, as my political party in France has been fighting. And yes, we do say, that's not right-wing, not left-wing. There are right-wing, traditionally right-wing views that we share. There are traditionally left-wing views that we might share, because if you're a sovereignist party, you look after your people, which might be considered left-wing by some, right? So I think, yes, there is a major, there is an opening of a new era that's starting for the whole world and for Europe, thanks to what's happened in the United States.
I should have thought of this initially, but I think a lesson to be taken from Donald Trump, like you just said, that I think I know that England is suffering from this, that Ireland and other countries, Austria, where the unfettered migration and the fact that crimes are being committed by people who have migrated to those countries. I think previously people would probably have been a little bit more afraid to make it a political issue, to bring it up, to talk about it, to call it out, to say, this is not okay. It's not acceptable that we have these open borders, people can come into our country, create mayhem, and there's nothing we can do about it. Well, Donald Trump has shown, yeah, you can talk about it. In fact, you can make it the centerpiece of why you're running for office. You can be successful, and it's okay for countries to look out and police their own borders. And I think that is a major lesson.
Okay, we have a question. Let me see. You, sir, you've been waiting patiently, and then I've noted the other two over there.
Hi, Tim. Oh, sorry. Hi, Tim. My name is Aaron. Actually, I'm from sports, soccer specifically, which is, as we know, the real football. But we can talk about that later.
I won't argue with you.
No, my question is very simple. With Mr. Trump, I think at the time, before and during the campaign, there was different types of criminality or charges or those type of things hovering over his head. So during your campaign, how did you manage that? What was your approach, your strategy? It would be great to understand your insights on that.
Well, all of it was illegitimate. That's what I believe, and that was our position. I think that if anyone, even the most partisan Democrat, would think about it, he would come to the conclusion that if he had not decided to run for president again, none of those charges would ever have been filed. They would never have come after him. If he had said, you know what, I'm just going to go back down to Florida and live out my days as a private citizen, they would have left him alone. But instead, they decided he was going to run. Everyone knew he was going to run. And so they went after him one at a time. And I don't think necessarily that there had to be a coordinated effort. There was no quarterback, to use American football term. There was no person calling the play, say, okay, New York, you're going to do this, and down in Atlanta, you're going to do this. It kind of became the thing that if you were a Democrat prosecutor somewhere and you had reason to claim that Trump had committed a crime by your interpretation of something in your jurisdiction, then by God, it was on you to go out and file some indictments and prosecute the guy. It was just what Democrats did. And it was like this slow motion train wreck that everyone could see happening, I thought, except the Democrats doing it. Like every time you do this, he gets stronger. Sooner or later, they're going to wise up and stop. But every time his fundraising increased, his lead in the polls got bigger. Every time they did it, he got stronger and stronger and stronger, because I think normal people could see that most of these things were ridiculous. The one judge valued, I don't know how many pictures or anything that you've seen of Mar-a-Lago where he lives, but empty lots in that neighborhood go for $75 million. An empty lot for $75 million. This judge valued the entirety of Mar-a-Lago at $17 million. That's absurd. And any normal person could look at that and say, well, they're just out to get the guy now. They tried to bankrupt. So I think all of that, it worked to our advantage. And I don't know, it took them a long time to figure it out, but I think they eventually did.
We have a lady. Yes, you, madam.
I don't think it was very pleasant for him, though. He didn't enjoy it.
Hi, thank you very much for this morning. It was really interesting. And my question goes back to...
Who are you, please? Yeah.
Oh, my name is Alexia Cosmello, and I work at Digital Europe. But these are all my own personal views, of course. Going back to the question that we had before about taking care of business at home first, how does that play in in the current world that we have? If Europe focuses on European issues, and the US, that has always been much more than Europe, the one that has seen themselves as a little bit the house upon the hill, right? A little bit the savior of many things since the First World War, Second World War, and then what came after the Cold War. If that's the tendency, and superpowers like China have the complete opposite tendency with initiatives such as the One Belt, One Road, and they're just taking ownership of the public debt of third world countries and taking advantage of their infrastructure by building it, because it's not only about Europe going and be like, oh, you have to include gender studies in your schools or whatever, but more about you have to be a democracy in the way we understand democracy for us to be able to help you when China is not agreeing with that. And if Europe starts focusing on their own, and we don't want to impose on that, and the US starts doing that, doesn't that leave just an open room for China to do whatever they want with a big part of the world that don't have the capacity to be a superpower like Europe or the US or China?
I guess that means will China fill the vacuum
right.
of an isolationist US?
Okay, well, this is where I'm going to declare that I'm just a simple political campaign guy. And I think it would be really dangerous for me to sit here and try to espouse some sort of theory about global diplomacy and global politics. My job is to get guys elected to office, or women. I've worked for a lot of women candidates too, get people elected to office. I think I will answer very simply and basically that I think that the world is better if there is a strong United States. I think the world is better if there's a strong Europe, and I think if the countries within Europe are strong, then Europe is strong and the world is better. I think that there's no question that China is a bad actor, particularly on human rights. They don't obey conventions and what most people in most countries think is the way that responsible countries should behave on a variety of fronts. And so the rest of the Trump approach, the America First approach, is the way that the president has approached making America stronger. That's the basis of the slogan. It's one that I agree with, and I think that as we've just talked about, if other countries follow that and strengthen themselves at the same time, it helps everyone be the counterbalance to countries like China. And I think perhaps you might have a better global diplomacy perspective on it than I would, because as I said, I'm just a simple campaign guy.
Well, now I've got to speak for myself here, so don't quote me, don't quote my party on this. Thank you very much for letting me give my view on that. We have reached a stage, I think, in global policies that we're looking at the future will be made of a multipolar world. It's a multipolar world. It's not only China, it's India. My cousin is a minister in Australia. Yeah, they are petrified of China actually coming into Australia and taking over Australia. So it's very complicated. It's very different for everyone. Now, I'm over 60. I've lived everywhere in the world, and I've got one solid conviction. One very solid conviction. I believe that countries are allowed to do what they want in their own country as they like it, by, supported by their people. This is what I claim for my own country. I don't want to be told not to do this. I don't want to be imposed women wearing, burkinis on beaches. Let everyone do what they want in their own country. So I don't pretend that we have superior values. I believe they're superior because I'm Western, I'm French, I'm a European. But I can quite understand that Chinese people want to live a different way, that Japanese people want to live a different way, and that maybe people in Afghanistan want to live a different way, although I really feel very sorry for the women there. So what I think is happening is Europe is not strong. All the money that's being pumped into the EU is only made for making legislation and rules and weakening our member states. That's what's happening, and allowing mass migration to come. So Europe is not, the way the EU is run today is not the solution. The way the EU is run today is the problem, and we should definitely look better at the United States, where federal states have more independence than today an EU member state has within the EU. European judges are telling French judges what to do about immigration, what to do about free speech laws, etc., etc. So no, let's assume, let's get our own house tidy first. Get France tidied up, and then France can help the rest of Europe. Get Belgium tidied up so that Belgium can help the rest of Europe. And never forget, the European Union was created around energy crisis, around energy prices. The coal, remember that? That's what it was all about. So let's get our energy problems sorted out in our home countries and go ahead. And I'm sure that in a multipolar world with Trump in the United States, everything will be fine.
It's kind of like what they tell you on an airplane. If the oxygen mask drops down and you're with a child, you're supposed to put your own mask on before you help somebody else. It's like that.
Oh, nice analogy. And there was a gentleman behind, yes, over there.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Tim. Thank you for these valuable insights. My name is Stavros Papagianneas. I am the CEO of STP Communications, a PR agency here in Brussels. My question is, can you please elaborate a little bit more about the McDonald's event and the strategy behind this? Thank you.
Well, first, there's a lot that goes into that, actually. One, it's fairly well known in the United States anyway, that McDonald's is just about the president's favorite food. He loves to, like on his plane. Yeah, he's an amazing physical specimen also at the same time. He loves McDonald's, and very frequently that's what's served on his plane when he's flying around his campaign plane, and even on Air Force One sometimes. So he loves McDonald's. Then there was also, during the course of the campaign, in the many things which we thought proved Kamala Harris's inauthenticity, was that she claimed to have worked at McDonald's when she was in college. But she wouldn't ever tell anybody exactly when that was or where was this McDonald's. We have a sneaking suspicion that it was because she did spend a year or so living in Montreal in Canada. And we think that the McDonald's was in Canada, but she didn't want to say that because it was in Canada and not the United States. So she was stuck not being able to describe where this alleged McDonald's was. And it went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and when she never came up with the location, even a town or state even, that we felt pretty safe in jabbing her about it. And so it got one of the advance team, it's what that's called, the people who plan the trips, they're called the advance team. One of them said, hey, what if he made fries at McDonald's one day? And everybody said, oh my God, that's the greatest idea in the world, because it hit a lot of things. And it connected with working class people. It just was a great political message. And only Donald Trump, and here's why it works. This is an amazing thing. This is he has a number of different, as people are saying now, he's got one of his superpowers is that he makes his political opponents lose their minds, right? So, like for example, the providing taxpayer-funded sex change operations for prison inmates is an insane public policy position to take. It's like a 90-10 issue. 90% of the people support it, 10%, or 90% oppose it, 10% support it. But because Donald Trump is on the side of the 90, the Democrats can't help but take the side of the 10. And they do it on purpose just because he's on the other side. They do it over and over again. It's unbelievable. One of his other superpowers is, and I don't even know how he does this, is that he goes into this McDonald's, and picture if it had been, because what she should have gone, she's the one who claimed to have worked there. She should have gone to a McDonald's and worked a shift, but she didn't, because she didn't want to answer the question about where it was, I guess, and so they were afraid of her manufactured biography. So, but picture it if she did. That would have been the most cringeworthy appearance. It would have been horrifying, because she would have pretended to be learning. She would have pretended to like be a person in training. She would have like acted like she was like, all right, we're all in. Are we ready to get to work, guys? You know, and all that. It would have been horrible, horrible. Donald Trump went in there, and he was just Donald Trump. He wore a suit, and he went and made French fries. He wasn't anybody other than Donald Trump, billionaire, who showed up at McDonald's one day. He wasn't pretending to be anything other than who he was. And that's why it worked, because he's not pretending. He's in there because he thinks it's kind of fun. That's it. And that's why it worked for him. But there was a message to it, because it's working class people, and it was a way that he connects incredibly, like I've said a couple times now, a billionaire connecting with the working people is something none of us has ever seen before. It's crazy. And also it tweaked her at the same time, because we don't believe she worked at McDonald's. Or if she did, it was in Canada.
Is there another question? Yes, we've still got a bit of time. Madam.
Thank you. Excuse me. My name's Grace. I'm an American living in Brussels, just representing myself here. Thank you for your time today. My question is about media and media literacy. I think everyone mostly would agree that there's a huge amount of polarization and anger within especially the American media, a lot of accusations of not just misinformation and propaganda, but lies and things like that. So with your professional experience, can you provide some skills or strategies for Americans, or really any citizens in a democratic society, to engage with the media? And how do you identify what is true or not? It's not realistic. Everyone reviews every single primary source. So how do you decide what is verifiable and true? And then specifically with that kind of outline of a litmus test, could you apply it to the new media and those entities, and especially those that are newly invited to and prioritized within the White House?
Wow. So how do you verify what's true? I don't know, because who are you going to allow to be, who would be acceptable as the arbiter of what is actually factual? I think the American establishment news media has set itself up as the people who are going to tell you what's true and what's not. And there has been an incredible, their approval rating, according to most public polls, show it's in the teens. Something like 16, 17% of people have a favorable view of the American media, which is abysmal. And of course, and they don't do themselves any favors over and over and over again. In the past election, 60 Minutes got caught favorably editing answers for Kamala Harris to make her look less incoherent. But look at what happened through COVID. The media outright lied to people about the transmittable effects of the virus, whether you could transmit it if you had the vaccine. They lied about mask wearing. They lied about whether or not it was effective or a good idea to close schools. They lied about the effect on students if you did close those schools. We now know that they were all lies. And no one in the news media has paid a price. If it had been a politician who told such outrageous lies and had been caught, you would like to think that that politician would not be reelected. But the news media just continues on like it never even happened. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I mean, when you talk about, it's kind of a similar argument when you're talking about speech laws and speech codes, like the 60 Minutes just had a very glowing, very favorable story about the incredible anti-free speech laws that are in Germany. They thought it was great, but it's pretty chilling if you ask me. But the question is, who gets to decide what's objectionable or not? And in my view, the answer to speech that you don't like is more speech. And so the answer to information that you might find suspect is more information. I think we have determined from our political perspective in America that the more the better. And we trust people to be able to weigh all the evidence and come up with a conclusion on their own. If you rely only on the Associated Press or Reuters or something like that, you are not going to get the honest-to-God truth. Reuters, for example, had a bureau in a building that was owned by Hamas, and Hamas had editorial control over what Reuters published about what was going on there. That's not trustworthy. So I don't know the answer to that. The answer is flood the zone with more information and let people sort it out, because who's going to trust anyone who's appointed to be the arbiter? I don't know. I'm not sure.
Do you want to say something on that, Patricia?
Yes. I would actually, if you allow me, I'll be very quick. Yeah, it's a main issue. Freedom of speech and freedom of expression is a main issue in the EU, is a main issue in France. And I think that's what we got to communicate about, is the fact that free speech is under threat. In France, ARCOM, which is our controlling agency of media, might suspend the license of C8, which is a very prominent TV channel, because they have not shown enough political plurality on that channel. Now listen, all public channels are completely left-wing, and they choose the one which might have, on one program, not have had the diversity which they require. But that channel risks to be taken off air. We all know, and I'm not going to go into a discussion about it, but the fact is, RT was taken off air in the EU. I believe that's wrong. I don't support Putin, but I believe it's wrong to take any public expression off the air, and that people decide for us what we can do. So if there is anything you can do, I think any citizen can do, is really do not stand for any censorship of media, and really fight for that freedom of expression, which I think is the main threat for the future elections in the EU, because I can see that they're trying to curb it wherever they can with EU legislation.
You mentioned RT. I want to. You always say things that make me think of something. One of my clients is a video sharing platform called Rumble. I don't know if anybody has heard of Rumble. And they're in direct competition. They do a lot of other things besides video sharing, but they're in direct competition in that part of it with YouTube. And people in the mainstream media, the New York Times, Washington Post, if they ever have cause to mention Rumble in a story, or if they're writing about Rumble, they always mention in very finger-wagging terms that RT, Russian television, has a channel on Rumble. And the New York Times finds that objectionable. How dare you platform this Russian propaganda channel? Well, as I said, and Rumble's view is that free speech ought to be basically absolute, and if there's speech that you don't like, the only antidote to that is more speech. And Rumble points out that Rumble is banned within Russia. If you live in Russia, you can't access Rumble. Russia has banned Rumble. YouTube, it's because Rumble had refused, Putin and Putin's government had demanded certain things of Rumble that you have, if you want it to be accessible within Russia, you have to take down these dissident channels. And Rumble said, no, we're not taking down those channels. And Russia said, okay, then you're banned. YouTube is permitted to operate in Russia. So what did they agree to?
Okay. We got last two questions, and then there will be time for coffee if you want to meet our guests in person. Sir, at the front here.
What I'm asking myself, and I want to ask you, is how do we go from this point where we have a lot of untapped potential? We have a J.D. Vance telling it like it is, I think. I mean, I watched that speech, and I was like, yeah, of course. I had no problem whatsoever with it. And yet, it doesn't tick. It doesn't seem to resonate. And so I guess I want to know if any of you see a path forward for the European Union or Europe or whatever we want to address it as, to break from this mentality that we are somewhat morally superior and yet we don't have the capabilities, the strength to back it up, and to just be humbled and chart a new way forward.
Well, I think
basically
in America, it takes somebody with the courage to do it and go into the arena and know that you're going to just get savaged for trying to do things like cutting spending and cutting fat from government. People like Bill Clinton, I don't know if you remember, many years ago, he gave a State of the Union address, and one of his famous lines from it, he declared that the era of big government is over. Right? Bill Clinton swore he was going to cut government, he was going to cut the bureaucracy. Barack Obama pledged the same thing and had, with great fanfare, talked about minor reductions in the spending. You know, it actually really was a reduction in the amount of increase. That's in Washington, that's what a cut is considered. If you reduce the amount of increase, that's a cut. But they didn't get raked over the coals the way Trump is currently getting raked over the coals, because everyone knew they didn't mean it. Trump actually means it. You have to have a leader who's willing to go out there and do it. And I think in Europe there are examples of that. But you have to be willing to go out, say these things that might be unpopular in certain circles, and certainly the intelligentsia and the establishment don't like these kinds of promises, these kinds of campaign pledges, and then you have to win the election. That's also key. You know, it's not enough to go out there and say you're going to do it. That makes for a lot of people who say, "Yeah, we're going to finally do this once and for all," but then you have to win. So I think in America, it took somebody like Donald Trump who didn't care. Like, I mean, imagine going through your life for the last 9 years and all the things that people said and did to him, and being willing to go through that. I mean, the man was nearly killed, and got only not killed because of really a huge, enormous stroke of luck. And all the horrible things that they've said about him, and what his grandchildren have heard people say. They call him. He has Jewish grandchildren. And the left calls him Hitler. His son-in-law and his daughter converted to Judaism, and his grandchildren, some of his grandchildren are Jewish, and yet the left calls him Hitler. And he's willing to put up with that. And you know, I mean, it's a rare personality. You might have a better idea about how Europe can address it, but it takes people being brave enough to do it, and then you actually have to win.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. First of all, it's bravery, determinants. You've got to have the willpower to do it. I believe in the spirit of nations. I believe that every nation has a spirit. I believe that in the collective intelligence of the people of nations. And change is coming to Europe. We can see it everywhere. I think what we can learn, though, how we can accelerate, is learn from that enthusiasm for the future. I really want to use that word again because it's so important. The enthusiasm that the Trump campaign created among the American people in saying better days are to come. In Europe, we've had catastrophic scenarios, you know, keep being preached at us. You know, the planet's dying, and we need to, you know, we're going to have shortage of this, and we're going to have epidemics, and it's a catastrophic scenario which is being predicted, and it keeps people in line. They're afraid it could get worse. You know, the planet's going to die. I think really the key to it, the absolute key to it, is to get our programs through with enthusiasm for the future. The future is not degrowth. The future is not a planet that's going to die. The future is not living in a cave and not being able to drive your car. The future is not having any children anymore because you've got to work. We've got to describe a different future. We've got to get people, young people, to feel enthusiastic for the future. And I think you guys gave a great example of how to do that.
Optimism is what it is. Yes.
Okay, is there a final question? There was one over here. Yes, you say yes. You get your chance, and then we'll break for coffee.
Very fast, because...
Who are you, please?
I'm Radoslav Stefanov. Currently, I'm doing a political science master in the VUB. Right? The question is to Mr. Murtaugh. You mentioned some cleavages or voting blocks, like white women, Jewish voters, and so on. I'm just interested, what about, let's say, Asian voters or people of Asian descent? How did they support Trump? And let's say people of Eastern European descent. Thank you.
You know, I'm not familiar with those numbers. I would hate to hazard a guess. That's rightly or wrongly in the focus of the American media and what numbers were available for what percentage of the vote that a candidate gets from certain demographics. We have to, generally speaking, rely on exit polls conducted by the media. And so that information, I'm sure, is probably available. I don't know what the breakdown of those were. But the focus of the election leading up, it's always the black vote because it is historically a very dependable Democratic voting segment of the population. Latinos, because the issue was illegal immigration, and it relates to our border with Mexico, and so that's why, in Hispanics, that's why that was the focus. Abortion was always a big message for the Democrat side, and so that's why women were in focus. And so there are very specific reasons why those demographics are singled out in the conversations, and I just don't have the information for the other ones. I'm sorry.
Peter, did you want to squeeze one in? Then we really must end, because we have to leave the building by midday.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your very interesting talk. Peter Kleppe with Brussels Report. So there was a story from Reuters on November 6th, and they claimed that Donald Trump had been ignoring his advisors, who reportedly would have told him to stay focused on the economy, how bad it was, inflation, and immigration, and to avoid personal attacks and stuff like that. So, I mean, what is true about that? Is it true that he followed his instincts and that actually turned out to be his strength, or is this just a nonsense story?
Yeah, it's probably a nonsense story. I have never, ever been in the room with Donald Trump where I heard anyone tell him not to do something. I haven't. And if someone had told him that, there is no reason for me to expect that he would ever listen to that advice. He's going to do what he thinks is right in any given situation. He is an unbelievably effective communicator. And he has an amazing way of getting people to see exactly what it is he's trying to say. We talked about, Make America Great Again. The red MAGA hat, he's very proud of the red MAGA hat. It may be the most recognizable, most effective piece of political merchandise in recent history anyway, since the 20th century, probably. I don't think he needs anyone's advice. And I don't think that the fact that he posts things on social media that certain people find offensive matters. I mean, who cares if he uses nicknames for people? It's part of his charm. It's part of who he is. It's also, I would point out, who he has always been for the last 50 years or so since he's been in the public eye. He was an extremely successful reality television star before he entered politics. He's the same guy today as he was back then, and everybody loved him back then. And now, because there's politics attached to him, half of the people decide to get offended when, 15 years ago they thought he was awesome for the very same reason. So I don't know. I've never witnessed anyone give him advice to tone it down, and I don't think it would be very well received if somebody tried, to be honest.
Okay. That's it. Let's wrap it up. I can only just thank our guests. Round of applause. Thank you. For Tim and for Patricia. And for Patrick for having the idea. And for our technical team, Sergio and the the team who've been wandering around with the microphones. Thanks for all your help. We've got coffee outside.